beginnings of Japanese American history, I think, begins not in Japan, but in the United States. And it even begins before the United States was formed, before the United States was even imagined. It begins, I think, with European peoples searching for a way to get to Asia. When Chris Columbus left Spain, he sailed westward looking not for America, but for Asia. That's why he called the people here Indians. So the centrality of Asia to the US is that European peoples on their way to Asia bumped into America and then founded the Republic ultimately. Commodore Matthew Perry was commissioned by President Millard Fillmore to go to Japan, to open Japan to US trade in the 1850s. Commodore Matthew Perry forced an entry into Japan with his modern ships and guns, overpowering the Japanese into signing a treaty of trade with the United States. And from that treaty of trade came not only open ports in Japan for American ships, but also the movement of peoples, Americans to Japan, Japanese to America. So many of the first Japanese who came, first came as students, as diplomats, and also as laborers. So my grandparents came or went from Japan, Okinawa, to the United States, to Hawaii, to work on the sugar plantations. Those were the beginnings then of Japanese America.
The first generation of Japanese to immigrate to the U.S. were called the Issei. They arrived in the United States before the Immigration Act of 1924 and were typically born between 1850 and 1905. Their children formed the second generation as the Nisei. Theodora Yoshikami is Sensei, or third-generation Japanese American. Her daughter Miwa Yoshikami is Yansei, or fourth-generation Japanese American.
My grandparents were living in Hawaii, and they, both my grandfather and my grandmother on my father's side were Buddhist ministers. So I guess my grandfather got work here in New York in this church. So they moved when my father was 6 to New York City, and my father basically grew up here.
My mother's side of the family, I'm not really sure when they came over. I know my grandfather was here, and he had 3 children. My father also came in 1915, and he was only 16 years old at the time. And the history that we heard was that then he was put under another family who were his guardians at the time because he was still young. But after that, he was the only family from the Morita side, and they're based in Shikoku Island. It's a separate island off of Japan. I was born in America's concentration camp in Tule Lake, California, during World War II, and that's when all the Japanese Americans on the West Coast and in Canada were put into 10 concentration camps throughout the United States. Basically, and about 120,000 people were put there and put in barracks in pretty horrendous locations, and families could only take whatever they could carry, basically, into the camp. So many people lost their property, lost all the, whatever they had in order to go into having to go into the camps. And from there, our family went to Seabrook, New Jersey, where I grew up. Seabrook was such an unusual situation where the majority of the class were all Japanese Americans. We went all the way through 8th grade together. And so, we sort of ran the school practically. So it was pretty, I never even quite had to question, am I different or, because we didn't have that experience.
I think for me it was different because growing up, I don't feel like I grew up in a Japanese American community at all. Growing up in New York City, when I was little, when someone said minority, I assumed African Americans and whites were the majority, and I thought I was the minority. I didn't understand that until I was a little bit older, but I think here, there were Japanese Americans here, but I think I only met maybe 1 or 2 other kids who were around my age who were Japanese Americans. So to me, I didn't really have a sense of Japanese American community.
After the war, the churches are really the only places that Japanese Americans could really just be themselves. You know, whereas the outside society, they had to act a certain way and do, be more American. And so it became the center for the community, whether you were Christian or Buddhist.
But yeah, I guess for me,
And doing Japanese
and doing
dance.
Japanese, I've done Japanese dance here since I was 6.
Tachibana is a classical Japanese dance form. The New York Tachibana Dance Company was established in 1966 by Sahomi Tachibana. The school's headquarters is in Tokyo, Japan. Miwa's mother, Theodora Yoshikami, a former dancer, first introduced her to Japanese dance. In the 1980s, Theodora headed her own Asian American dance company, the Morita Dance Ensemble, incorporating traditional Japanese dance into her work. Miwa continues the Japanese dance tradition through classes at the New York Buddhist Church. Since 1938, New York Buddhist Church has served as both a religious institution and cultural center for Japanese Americans. Reverend T.K. Nakagaki is the head minister.
New York Buddhist Church started 1938 by the Reverend Seki, who wanted to really bring the Buddha Dharma here on the East Coast. And then before, there are all the Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu Buddhism was in West Coast among the Japanese American. But then it's just only West Coast which has a lot of Japanese immigrants, and so that's most of the temple is already maybe 100 years old, and so it become like the cultural center also. The reason why we call it church is simply because this temple was long ago, right? It started, and used to be there's nobody know about Buddhism. Considered over 50 years ago, 1930s. 60s Zen came, but so it's become so popular. But that time of 1930s, and nobody knows about Buddhism itself. And then Buddhism itself is very, very unusual. And plus, Buddhist temples or something more unusual, right? And then at that time, go to church, right? They used to go to church every Sundays. And so from that sense, everybody goes to the church on Sunday, as well as the Japanese people go to the Sunday services and the churches, right? And also, so that like a priest is called minister here, instead of better monks and so forth. Many ministers here, status and a church. So it's like really the same style of the other Christian churches, right? And so that actually sort of protect themselves, the Japanese community from the other people. Of course, all the California people, West Coast, they are sent, right? They were sent to the internment camp, but also all the leaders of the temples, Buddhist temples especially. So like Reverend Seki, who started this temple, was also sent to the internment camp.
In California and the American West, As the Japanese Americans began to rent, sharecrop, and even own property, various states passed laws against that. Ownership, first of all, called the Alien Land Laws, where it said that aliens ineligible for citizenship cannot own land in this state. Now, only Asians, per the US Constitution, were aliens ineligible for citizenship. What that meant is since 1790, the US Constitution allowed only free white people to become naturalized citizens. And that was only modified after the Civil War for Africans, and Asians were left out. So Asians could not become naturalized citizens, right? So the parents, the first generations, could not become US citizens until 1952, right? So during that time, only their children were citizens, and states passed discriminatory laws against the parents, the Issei, first generation, like those alien land laws. And so what they did, that is, these institutional discriminatory laws, discouraged the Japanese from staying here more and more and more, until like World War II and the concentration camps.
62% of those interned in U.S. concentration camps during World War II were Nisei or Sansei. They were forcibly interned with their parents and grandparents. The Sansei played a leading activist role in a redress movement, which culminated in a bill signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1988. The bill offered an official apology to the Japanese American community and $20,000 restitution for each of the 60,000 remaining survivors of the concentration camps.
Most scholars agree that Japanese Americans acculturated to America. They retained certain core values and so forth. Language was one of the first things to go, actually. Language acquisition was exceedingly difficult in both the US and the continental US because of the public school system, principally, in which the second generation, people who were born in the US, had to go through the public schools or the schools. And there, of course, English was the medium of instruction, and they began to learn English. At home, they would speak Japanese with their parents, but in the schools and with their friends, they spoke English. Eventually, over the generations, by the third generation, I would say, most third generation could no longer speak Japanese.
In 1988, Theodora Yoshikami was awarded a U.S.-Japan Exchange Fellow to study Japanese classical and folk dance. She and Miwa took their first trip to Japan that year. Neither of them spoke Japanese.
When I was in 6th grade, I went to school in Japan, and I was only there for 7 months. I came back a little earlier, but yeah, I was basically thrown in, not speaking any I knew how to say, I don't understand, where's the bathroom, and thank you. That was it. So I left by the time I was at that, 12 kind of awkward phase. Everything was embarrassing, so I was embarrassed to speak, but I left understanding most of what everyone said to me. I felt like, in a certain way, I really fit in Japan until you spoke to me, because I think the way I thought was still very American. But a lot of parts of me that never quite fit in here, fit in there. Like, I was a very quiet child, and that was acceptable, to be quiet. You didn't have to be loud, as long as you were happy, that was fine.
All of the older women in Japan love Miwa.
Yeah, the grandmas all
love me. I didn't fit there, but she did.
She was the big embarrassment.
I talk too much. I don't care what people think. If I do something wrong, just tell me, then I'll just make some adjustment. But Miwa was very careful to watch. So I think she's got all those, picked up all those intangible type of non-spoken cues that I don't think I still pick up.
Many of my generation made those pilgrimages back there to those spots to try to reconnect with our ancestral roots. And many of us in that process discovered and learned that we're not really ancestral to that land. We're foreigners to that land, So even though I might look Japanese, I go to Japan, I'm still a foreigner in that land, gaijin, you know, and people can recognize that. So this desire to sort of reconnect with the so-called ancestral land oftentimes is mythological. It's just imagined, you know.
Hi, my name is Akiko Kobayashi. I was born in 1965 in Yokohama, Japan, and I came here in 1995. New York is very diverse, and I got to learn so many different things, including my own culture. There weren't many Japanese people living where I went to school in Stony Brook, and I guess people introduce other people, and I got to know people who do tea ceremony. And my mother is a teacher of tea ceremony, but growing up, I didn't pay attention. I didn't like what my mother was doing. I thought I wanted to do something different. But I came here and I saw it, and I saw people enjoying looking at the tea ceremony. It changed my mind, and I realized how little I knew about my own culture. So I started taking lessons from this lady who was organizing the tea ceremony lessons, and that expanded my whole Japanese community in Stony Brook and led to playing taiko drums.
And this is my parents' store. Maido is the only store in the tri-state area that's Japanese owned. We have all Japanese groceries, and so today I'll be giving you a tour.
Saeko Daly grew up in Osaka, Japan, helping her mother run a Japanese grocery store with an eat-in lunch counter similar to Maido. Saeko immigrated to the U.S. in 1985. In addition to cooking the soul food of the Osaka region for her customers in the Philadelphia area, Saeko also teaches them how to prepare the dishes themselves. She is preparing okonomiyaki and yakisoba today.
Let's see, this is okonomiyaki batter. We have shrimp, scallions, pickled ginger, all chopped up, nice fine pieces, and that's the tempura crunch. And we'll put some shredded cabbages, one fresh egg. Mix them up until we'll blend it, and we'll fry it on the grill. In Osaka, it is popular lunch or dinner dish. Onions, green peppers, and carrots and cabbages. We have noodles here. It is the like similar to the Chinese egg noodles, but we call this yakisoba noodles. Yakisoba is pretty much similar everywhere you go. And dancing bonitos. Okay. This is a special sauce for brown sauce for this dish. And we put a little bit of Japanese mayonnaise. And this is the bonito flakes. It's a type of tuna fish, dried and very thinly shaved. So look, it danced with the heat.
The Japanese House and Garden is located in Fairmount Park, Philadelphia, just minutes away from Maido.
This house was built in Japan, in Nagoya, and exhibited first in New York City in 1958 at the Museum of Modern Art. And after 18 months, 250,000 people had gone through the house. They, meaning the Japanese government and the people who had worked on the exhibition, decided that they wanted to give the house to the American people. And the question then became, well, where do we put it? Because it couldn't stay in New York. So a scouting trip started, and they went to Washington, they went to New York, they came to Philadelphia, and because of the Centennial exhibition that was here, there was actually a long history of a Japanese exhibit being right here in the park, in West Fairmount Park, and it was decided that the house should come here, and Fairmount Park gave the land, and that really became a catalyst for a long relationship between the park and also the Friends of the Japanese House and Garden, which was founded in 1982. So there was a long period between 58 and 82 when the city took care of the Japanese house. And then in 1982, after the bicentennial, a group of Japanese citizens and American citizens decided that they really wanted to form a friends group. And we are now have nonprofit status, and we are the ones that are taking care of the house.
I think it's important to have a place like this because most Americans and Westerners really don't know much about Japanese culture or about Eastern culture. And we are all on the same earth, and it's a good idea for us to understand different people, at least in my opinion. The opportunity to be in a building that is truly Japanese is very, very unique. We are the only Japanese house and garden in the country. There are some Japanese gardens and there's some Japanese houses, but to have the two together is very, very unusual. So it's a special treasure.
In New York City, thousands of Japanese people turn to New York Japion every week for up-to-date news written in the Japanese language. Toshio Nishi is the newspaper's publisher.
Many Japanese people cannot speak English, for me too. And they cannot pick up. They cannot pick the information. In New York City, it's very difficult for Japanese people. New York Japion is the only Japanese people live in the New York City because all letters in the Japanese and introducing the Japanese community information, or include the restaurant and hair salon and services, all Japanese services in New York City.
For Japanese, Asian Americans, actually all peoples of color, their identity as Americans is historic, magnificent, and mind-blowing, all right? Because the idea of America was predicated on whiteness, on European ancestry and identity. Since 1790, Asians were precluded from becoming naturalized citizens, meaning members of this community. The very idea of American did not fit my face. So we're sort of perpetual foreigners. But the very fact that Asians can be Americans is a very capacious, broad understanding of who Americans are. Now, Asians were excluded from citizenship, and their inclusion as citizens was important for this republic in terms of citizenship. Asians, like other minority people, were excluded. They were segregated from schools, from jobs, from neighborhoods. They couldn't do all of those. They didn't have those freedoms. And in their struggle, meaning peoples of color, including Asians and Japanese Americans, fighting against those discriminatory, like alien land laws, like prohibitions against language schools, Japanese language schools, separate and unequal educations, they, in winning those rights, preserve those rights for all Americans also.